Thomas sat in his modest apartment in downtown Brooklyn. The rain pounded the window, reflecting his inner turmoil. He reached for the bottle of beer he had opened an hour ago, but he never finished it. The light from his laptop screen illuminated his face, which was filled with determination mixed with a hint of doubt. The last few weeks had been strange. Something had changed between him and Jessica, his girlfriend. Whether it was her behavior or his own paranoia, everything pointed to a crack in their relationship. At first, it was small things. The occasional smile, the vague answers she gave to questions, her phone vibrating more often. Then Thomas began to notice more. She began to come home from work later, saying she was late because of meetings. Sometimes he caught her looking at him strangely, as if she wanted to say something but changed her mind. Thomas was not a jealous person, but a voice inside him was telling him that he needed to figure this out. He tried to talk to her directly, but her answers were evasive. Eventually, he began to delve into himself. Maybe it was just his insecurity, but the more he thought about it, the more doubts gnawed at him. One night, scrolling through social media, he stopped at a photo of Jessica. It was taken during their recent trip to a festival. Her smile, usually warming his heart, now seemed mysterious to him. That was the night when an idea was born in his head. He decided to test it, but to do it secretly. Thomas created a new social media account, a new profile, a new person. He spent a long time choosing photos for Ben Carter, a fictional successful businessman. Thomas chose images that would look natural, but still attractive enough. He added a few posts to make the profile seem real. Photos from trips, pictures with friends, even quotes about life. When everything was ready, Thomas sat back and thought. For the first time in a long time, he felt like his plan was taking shape. He added Jessica as a friend and sent her the first message, writing something simple and neutral. A few hours later, she responded. Thomas couldn't believe how easily it all started. Jessica willingly entered into the conversation, and from the very first messages, he felt that she was interested. At first, they exchanged meaningless phrases about books, films, work. Ben seemed to her an easy, open conversationalist. With each passing day, their conversations became more and more profound. Jessica shared her dreams, reminisced about her childhood, talked about things she had never discussed with Thomas. He read her messages with a bitter feeling. On the one hand, this was a new level of intimacy, but on the other, she was opening up not to him, but to a fictional image. Thomas began to notice how their conversations affected her behavior in real life. She began to communicate with him less, often hiding her phone if he was nearby. Sometimes, when he tried to talk to her, she just nodded, staring at the screen. This angered him, and at the same time increased his desire to see his plan through to the end. A couple of weeks later, he proposed to meet her on behalf of Ben. It was risky, but Thomas believed that it would be the culmination of the test. He chose a cafe on the other side of town, where they had never been together. The time and date were set, and he sent a message. It didn't take long for the answer to come. She agreed. That night was one of the most difficult for Thomas. He lay in bed, Jessica sleeping next to him. Her breathing was even, her face was calm. He looked at her and tried to understand what he was feeling. Anger? Disappointment? Maybe fear? As the day of the meeting approached, Thomas felt the tension growing inside him. He was sure that his plan was going as planned, but now the question was what to do next. He did not have a clear answer. He wanted the truth, but he was not prepared for its consequences. Before the meeting, he opened Ben's profile again to check how he looked from the outside. Everything was perfect, smiling, confident, with bright photos and impeccable style. Thomas caught himself thinking that he was starting to envy his own fictional character. The hours dragged on painfully long. Jessica sent a few more messages before the meeting, and each of them sounded too confidential for Thomas. It was like a knife that cut him deeper. When the day of the meeting came, Thomas decided to go all the way. He was ready to watch her from afar to see how she reacted. He convinced himself that this was the last point after which he would either finally calm down or understand that their relationship had collapsed. But he didn't know yet that everything would go differently than he had planned. The day of the meeting arrived. A small cafe on the outskirts of Manhattan, chosen by Thomas, looked inconspicuous enough that no one would suspect that a small personal drama was being played out there. The atmosphere inside was warm, almost homely. Soft lamplight, the smell of freshly baked croissants, and soft jazz. It was the perfect place for a private meeting, or, in Thomas's case, for covert observation. He arrived early, taking a table in the far corner of the room. Sitting down so that he would not be seen from the entrance, he carefully surveyed the surroundings. His heart was beating faster than he expected. Time seemed to slow down, turning every minute into an ordeal. Jessica was 10 minutes late. When she entered, Thomas froze, barely breathing. She looked flawless, as if she had carefully prepared for the meeting. Her light dress emphasized her slender figure, and her hair was styled with that natural carelessness that required great effort. She looked around, as if trying to find Ben. Thomas felt something cold squeeze his chest. Trying not to give himself away, he continued to watch. Jessica walked up to the counter, ordered a coffee, and took a seat by the window. She checked her phone, glanced at the clock, then looked back at the screen. Thomas knew she was waiting for a text from Ben, but he didn't. Thomas's plan had changed abruptly. He couldn't bring himself to continue the game. He sat at his table, feeling a lump growing in his throat. His eyes were fixed on her, but his mind was racing. How had he gotten to this point? What was he even trying to prove? Jessica stayed in the cafe for about 30 minutes. She sipped her coffee, occasionally checking her phone and looking around the room. Thomas watched her expression gradually change from anticipation to mild disappointment. It caused him a strange mixture of pain and schadenfreude. When she finally stood up and left, Thomas felt the tension ease, leaving only emptiness in its wake. He watched her disappear around the corner of the street, and he felt insignificant. When he got home, he expected to see her. But when Jessica walked into the apartment, Thomas barely recognized her. She looked tired, almost depressed. Her demeanor was quiet, even distant, as if she was trying to process something important. Thomas expected some guilt in her eyes, but he saw nothing of the sort. Instead, he saw a woman who seemed to be struggling with something. This surprised and alarmed him. That night, when Jessica fell asleep, Thomas opened Ben's profile again. It seemed to him that everything was over, that the game had ended the moment he didn't show up for the meeting. But when he went to the correspondence, he saw a new message from her. It was unexpected. Jessica wrote that she had been waiting for him, that she would be interested in getting to know him, but she understood that perhaps he had changed his mind. There was a slight sadness in her words, but no reproach. It was as if she had left the door open, allowing him to decide for himself whether to continue. Thomas was confused. Her message destroyed his idea that she was cheating on him or looking for something else. It seemed like genuine interest, but not cheating. He decided to reply. Now Ben was back in the game, but with different intentions. Thomas wanted to understand why Jessica was communicating so openly with a stranger. He carefully asked her about her motives, pretending to be interested. Jessica replied that sometimes it was easier to talk to strangers. It was a frank answer that surprised Thomas. The longer their conversations went on, the more Thomas began to understand that it was not that Jessica wanted to leave their relationship, but that she felt lonely. Her words hinted at fatigue, a lack of attention, a desire to be heard. But instead of seeing this as a chance to change something, Thomas continued to play the role of Ben. He felt that he was starting to lose control. Each time he communicated with her through a fictitious profile, he noticed how she became more and more alive, smiling, real. While in their real relationship, her eyes began to dim. One late evening, Thomas discovered that Jessica had started asking questions. She wanted to know more about Ben, where he worked, what his hobbies were, who his friends were. Her interest became more and more personal, and Thomas realized that his game had gone too far. The situation became even more complicated when he noticed that she began to discuss things with Ben that concerned their relationship. She did not say his name, but it was obvious that she was talking about Thomas. Her words made his heart clench. She said that she felt like her partner was moving away, that she was afraid of losing contact with him. This was the truth that Thomas did not want to hear. Her words hurt him more than he expected. But what happened the next day shocked him even more. Jessica asked to meet again. This time she chose a place. It was a park where Thomas and Jessica often walked when they first started dating. This became a challenge for Thomas. Can he continue to lie? Or is it time to stop the game before things go too far? He knew there was more at stake this time than just testing him. This was no longer an innocent experiment. His lies were starting to destroy what had once seemed the most important thing in his life. The park greeted Thomas with the sound of wind in the trees and the smell of freshly cut grass. It was their special place. It was where he and Jessica spent their Sunday mornings, drank coffee from paper cups, and made plans for the future. Now the park had become an arena where they would decide where their relationship would go next. He had arrived early, but not to watch from afar like last time. Today Thomas was going to see everything with his own eyes, even if it meant facing his own fear. Jessica was already there. She was sitting on a wooden bench by the lake, her hands on her lap, her gaze wandering somewhere on the horizon. She looked different. No trace of her usually flawless makeup. Instead of an elegant dress, simple jeans and a warm sweater. Thomas suddenly realized that she seemed tired of everything, even of the image she was used to maintaining in front of him. But this did not make her less beautiful. Quite the opposite. At that moment, there was some fragility in her face that pierced the armor of his disappointment and anger. He stood at a distance, feeling the tension growing inside him. She was waiting for Ben. She was waiting for him. And this realization finally tore him in half. Thomas struggled with himself, standing in the shadow of the trees. He could not continue this game any longer, but he also could not just approach her. After all, she was waiting for another person, not him. He tried to figure out what to do next, how to get out of this situation without completely destroying everything. And then Jessica took out her phone. She typed a message and sent it, and then returned her gaze to the lake. Thomas felt a vibration in his pocket. It was a message from her, addressed to Ben. She wrote that she was sorry that he did not come again. The words echoed painfully in Thomas. It was as if a dam had burst inside him. Accumulated doubts, jealousy, resentment, guilt, all mixed into one huge lump. He realized that she was not waiting for Ben as a man, not a false, ideal interlocutor. She was waiting for someone who would understand her, who would be able to hear what she had been trying to say for a long time. And he realized, Jessica had never been looking for someone else. She had been looking for a way to feel alive, needed. Thomas spent the next few days in agonizing thought. He hadn't been able to approach her that day, and later returned home, pretending that nothing had happened. Jessica had been acting strange, as if she was worried about something, but didn't want to show it. She tried to maintain a normal routine, cooking dinner, asking about his day, but everything seemed forced. Thomas no longer logged into Ben's account. He knew that continuing to play the game would only make things worse. However, now he was unsure of how to fix everything he had done. One night, when Jessica was already asleep, he sat quietly in the kitchen, going over her last words from their correspondence. She wrote about her uncertainty, about feeling lost. These confessions sounded as if she had long wanted to say them, but did not dare to do it in real life. Thomas suddenly realized that he was to blame for this gap that had formed between them. He was there physically, but he had long ceased to be a truly close person. He focused on work, on his own worries, missing her signals, her needs. And now that she had finally found a way to talk, he was only an observer, not a participant. The next day, Thomas made a decision. He could not continue to remain silent, but he could not immediately admit what he had done. Instead, he decided to bring back the honesty that had disappeared into their relationship. He started with small things. A sudden bouquet of flowers that he brought home. A dinner prepared with her favorite dishes. Watching a movie together that she had long wanted to see. At first, Jessica reacted cautiously. Her smile was tense, her gaze wary. Thomas knew that this was only the beginning, that it would take time to regain her trust, even if she did not yet know that he had anything to apologize for. However, soon her smiles became more genuine, and there was a warmth in her eyes that he hadn't noticed for a long time. A few days later, Thomas opened Ben's profile again. He knew he had to end this story, but he wanted to do it carefully. He wrote her one last message, apologizing for not being able to meet and hinting that he would no longer be able to communicate. It was like closing a door that should never have been opened. Jessica responded. Her message was short, but full of gratitude. She wrote that this communication helped her understand that she needed to work on herself and her relationships. Thomas closed his laptop, feeling as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He would never return to this image again. But he didn't know yet that the ending of this story was waiting for him in a completely different place and in a completely different way than he had expected. A week had passed since Thomas ended communication on behalf of Ben. Life gradually began to return to its usual rhythm, although there was still a heaviness inside Thomas. He felt like he was mending something between him and Jessica, but knowing what he had done was still bothering him. Jessica seemed to have calmed down, too. She had often been thoughtful in recent days, but her smiles were more genuine, and there was a warm sparkle in her eyes that had long since faded. Thomas had hoped that his efforts were strengthening their relationship again. But one day he discovered that reality was not so simple. It was an ordinary evening. Thomas came home from work, and Jessica was already waiting for him at home. She had prepared dinner, as she had in their better days, and while they were sitting at the table, she suddenly said, "We need to talk." These words made Thomas wary. Her voice was soft, but determined. Jessica said she had been processing a lot of things in the last few weeks. She admitted that she had felt lonely, even though Thomas was there. She tried to be strong, but she often found herself thinking that her partner had become distant. She paused, and then added that she wanted to restore their relationship because she loved him. But then came the words that made Thomas freeze. Jessica said that she had to seek support to avoid closing herself off, and that someone on social media became her listener. Thomas felt like time had stopped. His heart was pounding. He knew who she was talking about, and he knew that the truth was at stake. But Jessica didn't blame him. She didn't look guilty. Instead, she thanked the stranger who helped her realize that she still wanted to fight for their relationship. Those words tore Thomas apart. She didn't know that this stranger was himself. That night, Thomas lay awake. Jessica's words rang in his head, preventing him from resting. She believed that someone had helped her come back to herself, to find confidence and understand what she needed. And he sat next to her, overcome with guilt for lying to her. The next morning, Thomas could no longer hold it in. He called Jessica and said that they needed to talk. Her face tightened, but she listened attentively. He confessed everything. He told her about his plan, about creating the Ben profile, about the correspondence, and even about the meetings he had not shown up for. His voice trembled, and his hands clenched into fists with shame. He expected a scream, reproaches, accusations. But none of this followed. Jessica was silent for a long time. Her gaze was focused, and her face remained calm. When she finally spoke, her words sounded unexpected. She said that she knew. Thomas could not believe his ears. Jessica explained that she had figured out his game a few days ago. She had noticed how strange he had started to act, his changes in behavior, even small coincidences in the words of Ben and Thomas himself. She admitted that at first it had angered her, but instead of making a scene, she had decided to give him a chance to stop himself, to realize his mistake. And her guess had been right. Thomas had indeed stopped playing the role and had started working on their relationship. Her words had stunned him. Thomas felt mixed emotions wash over him. He didn't know whether to be happy that Jessica had given him the chance to fix everything, or ashamed that she had seen right through him. But what struck him most was her calm. She had said that they had both made mistakes. She had felt guilty for distancing herself from him, seeking comfort from a stranger, even if he had turned out to be him. And she believed that now they could start all over again, but with one important condition: no lies. Thomas and Jessica began to build their relationship from scratch. They no longer avoided difficult conversations, did not withdraw into themselves. Instead, they learned to listen to each other, to speak honestly about their feelings and needs. For Thomas, this was not only the beginning of a new relationship, but also a lesson that he remembered for the rest of his life. Trust cannot be tested by deception. It is built on the truth, even if it is unpleasant or difficult. And Jessica no longer felt lonely. She knew that now next to her there was a person ready to fight for both of them. And when they sat together in the same park where this story once began, everything that had been before seemed distant, almost unreal. Thomas felt that he had finally found what he had been losing for a long time. Not only her, but also himself.